welcome back.
We apologize for the delay in the upcoming of our second episode. We wanted to keep you guys in deep suspense.
Yeah, we've been busy this past couple of months with editing a book. We've been going through the editing stages of a book. We're writing a book together.
So mark your calendars because it will be coming out in July 22nd,
23rd,
2024.
23rd, July 23rd. And we left off in our last episode, or the introduction of the episode, with getting to know Erica a little bit more and about how she kind of got into this work and how she became a therapist.
Yeah, so I'll take it from here. I actually never saw myself in private practice or as a therapist. I think I really fell in love with social work, and so that kind of started my career in social work. I would say before that, I grew up in a very 1 out of 7 kids and a very religious upbringing. So there was definitely an awareness there of kind of the different family dynamics and attachment styles, and that was something that I thought about oddly as a teenager kid. I used to go to Barnes and Nobles and even like read books on attachment because I think I would see things happening and I just wanted to understand like why things are happening this way. So it's kind of a combination of kind of firsthand experience and just kind of curiosity and wanting to learn more about like human nature and why we attach and bond in certain ways. And then also I think there is a real passion for to bring social justice and some of the awareness of the injustices in the world. So yeah, it's kind of a short answer, but I would say, yeah, having some of that experience kind of growing up in a more kind of like highly controlled environment that was a conservative Christian fundamentalist. And so here I am now as a therapist.
I have some questions for you around that. Do you remember sort of like the first time being a therapist, like the first time walking in a room and like doing therapy with someone? Or the first like sort of agency that you worked in that role for you was like to be a therapist, even if it was like an internship per se?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember in Arizona when I was going to school for social work, and there was kind of more of a push for people to be doing therapy. And so the agency that we were at in Arizona, they really kind of pushed to support people to be doing more therapy and in-home therapy. And I remember at the time working with different children and adolescents, and I just remember having a very different experience around like being able to really hear the story, being able to really understand from their perspective what they're experiencing. So I think that was a really eye-opening experience where I was really drawn in and was like, wow, like this is really interesting to be able to like sit with them and support them in a very different kind of way.
Yeah, and I know it's been almost a decade since you've been in that, I guess, setting, working with the Native Americans in Arizona. The sort of trajectory that you kind of went on to become like a therapist who focuses on somatic based practices and also like internal family systems. What initially got into like the somatic work, and also after that, I guess, internal family system?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started to become aware of it in kind of different ways about learning about trauma and how the body holds trauma. And I think in somewhat of doing of my own work, there was this kind of awareness of how like the nervous system can kind of take over and go into overdrive and do these different things, or kind of cause a collapse or a shutdown, or can cause, all these different responses for us that we may not be like consciously aware of. And so as much as I enjoy like the analysis and the intellectualizing of what things are happening, I was also realizing that things were still happening for me that I didn't really understand how to get out of, or how to make sense of, or how to shift it for myself. So that kind of opened up that world where I started to learn more about somatic therapy, started to learn about internal family systems, and became really interested in being able to learn more about that. So.
Yeah. I think you keep hearing your phone going off. This is why the random sort of like smiles and laugh keep coming up. Yeah. So explain to me a bit about internal family systems and how does it work and how one becomes aware of, I guess, these internal parts of themselves. What is it?
Yeah, internal family systems is a therapy that was created by Richard Schwartz, Dr. Richard Schwartz. And in doing so, I think he became very aware of how like spontaneous compassion would emerge in a person when they would step back and kind of observe different parts of themselves that may be feeling a certain way, interacting in a certain way, showing up in a certain way. So he referred to it as like sub-personalities that we have. They get created at different times of our life, and they serve a very particular function and mechanism in order to really support yourself, to support the system. Now, of course, some of these parts of ourselves can take on very extreme roles and be very destructive. But at the time that they were created, it may have been at the time like an effective way to try to mitigate some of the trauma that the person is going through. So an example of what this could be, maybe a person learns that from a young age that being authentic or expressing their needs or their wants or how they're actually feeling about something is not, there's no space for that, it's not received. Maybe they get a lot of praise if they are accommodating, if they are quiet and go with the flow. So they may start to develop this part of themselves that can play this role of being the accommodating person in the room, being very attentive to other people's needs, and totally abandoning themselves, totally abandoning what they feel and what they want. So that's like an example of kind of exploring your own different parts, understanding them, and also I think what I love about it is the goal is always to be in relationship with your parts, to understand your parts. It's never to try to call apart a bad part or get rid of a part. It's really to draw that part of you in, to have a deeper relationship with that part of yourself so that there can be harmony, so that there can be balance. And a lot of what happens when that part of ourselves that's maybe been disconnected from the entire internal system and plays this extreme role or has to engage in some of these like harmful behaviors, once they are able to be in relationship with yourself in a new way, a lot of times what will happen is that need to show up in that way is no longer there. So I know that might be still a little bit confusing to understand what exactly I'm talking about or what that means, but I think we all know what it feels like when maybe a part of us really wants to go out and make friends or be social, and another part of us feels really conflicted. It wants to stay home, it doesn't want to go anywhere, right? Like all of us have had times in our lives where we may feel very conflicting experiences or feelings that may feel in opposition with each other. And so internal family system really kind of welcomes the opposition, welcomes the conflict, to understand more of like, okay, there's two different experiences that are happening here. Let's get to know them. Let's understand the stories behind them.
Yeah, and I think it gives room to the, I guess, a very clinical word again, like integration, right? It's rather than like splitting off these parts, like this part is no good, this is not good. You start welcoming these parts in, and over time, that integration kind of comes in. Oh, this is a part of me. This is something. This is the reason why this part comes up. It's a protective part, right? In this situation, I might become really upset doing this situation, right? So like, where does that come from? You explore, you get to know that part, right? And rather than pushing it away, now it's integrated into your being, and you know it a bit more, and you know who it is and what it's trying to do. One way that I've heard of explaining to me is the idea of like, we always have like these different parts that show up in different environments, right? When we are with kids, we are a certain way, right? Our tone of voice might change. When we are with our friends, we are a certain way. We might feel a little bit more comfortable talking a certain way, speaking a certain way, saying things that we might not say when we're around other our coworkers or say. Um, so that's why I think I love the idea of part works. It's Richard Schwartz did a beautiful job of sort of like creating it in a way that like it's very accessible to people to understand. I think that's really good. I think there's been other theories who have used parts of it, right? I think he
Mm-hmm.
did a great job pulling from that and creating his own theory around it.
Mm-hmm.
How is that to kind of use like how do you use somatic based practices and uh, IFS together? How those two things are wedded? How do you wed those two things together?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to people about like kind of the specialties or the ways that I practice, I try to give some examples because somatics comes from the word soma, which means body. So it is really this kind of awareness of us as an entire being, that we also have visceral experiences. We also have things that happen in our body that a lot of times get ignored or dismissed or misunderstood, which can be really valuable information as we're trying to work things out in therapy. So an example of what this may look like let's say I have somebody coming in and they're talking about their mom, and I'm noticing that they're clenching their jaw. I'm noticing that their breathing is changing. I'm noticing maybe they can't make eye contact in session, right? So all of this would be information that we would kind of begin to explore. I may give some feedback about what I'm noticing. Okay, I'm noticing this topic, like your breathing is changing right now. Something's happening for you. Is it okay if we explore this? So another part of doing somatic works is also getting consent, because not everybody is ready to explore kind of the visceral experiences of what's happening for them in a body way. So it would be kind of checking in and that back and forth, being able to ask for consent. And then one way that I may explore this is having them develop language to be able to understand, like, oh yeah, there's like, I feel like this electric energy and it's racing and it feels chaotic and I feel a constriction in my throat. To being able to really kind of locate, to be able to describe it, to be able to kind of hold space for it. So acknowledge its presence, acknowledge that it's there. And then after kind of holding some space for this experience, we may also explore if this sensation feels familiar. When else have they felt this? What else is connected to this? So there's a lot of different routes that we can kind of explore depending on what the person is experiencing and needing. But there's a lot that can be connected to a body sensation that we may have, that we also may have familiar memories around this experience of shutdown and a knot in my throat. Like, yeah, I remember so many other times in my life that I felt this when this was happening. So,
And I think what people will often forget that is that the somatic practices is probably at the root of a lot of like therapy, right? Of psychotherapy in general, and a random like history thing. Like Joseph Brewer is the guy who Freud studied under, right? The reason why he uh, he was the guy that kind of was a psychiatrist or a physician, not a psychiatrist, he was a physician, right? Who had patients in Vienna who was working with who had a lot of like somatic issues, and they couldn't find out the reasons why, right? Just like this in around the late 1800s, and he coined the term like talking cure, right? So he'll kind of help them process what's happening for them and in their body. And he's like, something is happening when I help them kind of like process and also connect to like childhood events, right? And Freud from there was a student under him and picked up a lot of this stuff and was able to build a theory from, right? But a lot of it was based on somatic experiences, right? This physician was seeing these people with somatic based stuff that they was not sure what was happening, and that's how like psychotherapy actually began, right? So somatic based stuff is actually at the root of a lot of psychotherapy. I know a lot of the time there's a lot of great research around like somatic practice, how a lot of like black and brown bodies hold things somatically. I agree with that 100%, but I also will say that everyone does it, right? Everyone kind of holds it in their body to an extent. Yeah, so I think I think the idea of somatic practices should be in everyone's sort of approach to therapy, right? Maybe they might not sit with a person and hold that body feeling, that feeling in their body for 20 minutes in session, right? But they will explore like, oh, this is happening to your body. How come this is happening to your body right now? Right? How come you're restless? How come you're moving a lot? How come you, when we talk about this, you become really tight? What's happening with your hands, right? If your hands can speak, what would it say at this moment? Right. So I think the somatic based practices is something that I think it's very, very important, and everyone should sort of find a way to kind of integrate it into their practice, no matter what theory that they hold. I think this is, I was thinking about this while you were talking. The first time I was actually introduced to somatic based practices, and it was actually working with kids, and how we used to have sort of these exercises where we'll have kids sort of like, hey, color in the part of your body uh, that you notice when you're upset, right? And they will always go into the part of your body. They'll get a little figure and the color in, like, oh yeah, my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I always found that like amazing, right? Especially at the time I was doing that work, 'cause I was not very connected to my body. I was like, how do they know? How do they know that part? How are they feeling things around their body? Uh, so I found that really interesting. But yeah,
Yeah. No, it is. It is amazing the ways that kids are kind of naturally more connected than adults are. But yeah, to switch gears, what about maybe you can tell me a little bit about you? Like, when did your interest start for therapy? How did you become a therapist?
yeah, I think I have like a two sort of, I have an answer, a sort of like two answers for that question per se. And it's, um, think being a therapist was never a thought that I had in mind at all growing up. I had those, I guess, thoughts around like being a professional athlete is what I always thought I was gonna be my whole life. I was gonna be a three-sport athlete like Deion Sanders or something, or I guess Deion was a two-sport athlete, but I that's what I thought, right? But I will say like subconsciously I was somewhat always in this space where I got to see a lot of folks sit down and like process whatever was happening in their life, right? My parents were pastors, right? So and at the time they often had folks kind of come over our house. So we took in a lot of folks for a lot of different reasons, right? They had domestic issues, homeless issues, or immigration based stuff that they needed a place to stay. Our home was often a place of shelter for a lot of people, right? And during these moments, I got to see my parents a lot, just kind of like sit at the kitchen table. You know, Erica has heard me tell this story several times, right? And they would kind of process what's happening, right, with these people, and maybe it's at times I might have been a little bit too young to be hearing sort of these stories, right? Stories of domestic violence, stories of hardship, right? And losses and all these different things that my parents kind of sat with these people and helped them process. And but again, they would probably be like in the kitchen, right? In the kitchen table, and we'll be in the living room. And like when I say we, I mean me and my brothers would be in the living room, and we'll hear these stories, right? And we'll kind of hear my parents kind of sitting with these folks and helping them process and um, kind of hear them out. And so I think I, to an extent, had that experience of coming across these, what I would say, like this dialogues and dynamics of what was happening in the room at a really young age for a majority of my childhood, I would say. But again, I just never thought I was going to become a therapist. I eventually started doing, I guess, like social justice work. And I noticed that I was really good with like sitting and being with people, hearing them out, right? A while back, me and one of my brothers and some friends, we opened like an art studio, and we got folks from the Latin American community to kind of come and be in the art studio. There's a lot of like teenagers, and we sit with them and kind of catch up with things. And that's how I first got started sitting with folks. And then eventually Erica and I got a job in Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we moved to Arizona, and I was initially just working with kids with that had some behavior issues, right? And And from there, I started working with their families, right? And some of this work was like family unification based work, right? So I got into this place where I was doing sort of this case management, and also support staff type of work with them. But I was not like a family therapist, right? But I sort of,
We were having to learn a lot of
yeah,
the kind of ways to therapeutically support
a
somebody
hundred
very
percent.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had really awesome like supervisors at the time, right? Who were had an LCS level, who was my supervisor, and she encouraged me to sit with them and be with them and do the work that I want to do. I was not the best case manager for them at the time. If they wanted me to call someone, I would hesitate. I don't like calling people on the phone, right? Or do whatever, or take them out shopping, or do those things that I was just, I don't know, just not good things I was good at, things that I'm not good at. But I was good at sitting with people, hearing their stories, and helping them process what's happening, right? A lot of losses. And around that time, I became really aware and interested in like trauma and intergenerational trauma as well, right? I
Mhm.
started seeing it in the room with me, right? So as working in these working in the reservation with Native Americans, right, and just seeing in the room like grandparents, and all these folks in the room, and you start seeing the connection inside the room with them while you're doing this sort of like family support work, and you're processing what's happening with them. You start seeing like just everything that's kind of happening. And I always had sort of this awareness and or interests around social justice stuff, and folks who are marginalized. So I had an idea and history around the Native American community in general. So I knew like the social, political stuff that also was impacting them and had impacted them in the past, right? So all of this stuff was happening at the same time. I I became really interested in graduate school, right? And I was like, oh, like I think I'm a go to graduate school and become a therapist.
So we moved across the
So
country.
we moved across country to New York, right? Which the interesting part of Erica and I, like when I went to graduate school, social work school, I went to graduate school, which is the sole purpose of becoming a therapist. It was not to become anything else. It's like I'm a finish school and I'm gonna open up my practice and be a therapist. I've sat with people even before graduating school that so I sat with people individually and families for a while. So like this is the work that I think I'm called to do. I think I'm pretty okay at it. I'm pretty good at it, and and the information and the knowledge around it, I tend to really take in and chew in a lot, and
Mm.
so I think working with those families in Arizona and those individuals in Arizona, right? A lot of those families and individual had a diagnosis, right? And the agency that we worked in, where you were a therapist, but the agency that we worked in general, they had a lot of therapists that also met with and processed and talked about what was happening in the room and with those families, right? So that kind of gained an interest, right? And at that time, I was reading a lot about like intergenerational trauma and trauma and how it played a role and some of that stuff. And then I eventually went to New York. I was really privileged to have some really awesome folks I got to work under that really expanded my mind, and I got to see a lot of different things, right? I think eventually I want to be able to interview one of my supervisors that I worked under at Bordeaux Psychotherapy Center, right? And she just really opened my mind to like the dynamics in the room and how I'm always the role of me in the room and what people bring in the room.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say along that lines, do you want to tell people more like what type of therapy you're
Yeah.
really passionate about practicing and what that looks
hmm
like?
Yeah. So the work that the attachment based work is at the core of my work. It's at the core of what I do as a therapist, even if I'm not talking about it at all in session, or I don't go on a long-winded conversation about it, psychoeducation around attachment work. I think that's we're constantly healing these attachment wounds, those relational wounds, right? So a lot of my work is processing and feeling these attachment wounds, these relational wounds that we all sort of had, right? Our first relationships tend to be with our parents. Our first also wounds usually are with our parents, right? And because that's just our first relationship in general. Our first experiences of repressing things is with probably with our parents or folks that we are close with, right? So a lot of my work is helping people kind of gain insight, awareness to those experiences, and also processing those experiences, right? There's a lot of grieving that comes with that, right? There's a lot of trauma that comes with that. So a lot of my work is helping folks process that, right? The one thing that one of my supervisors, right, said that I think I hold on, this is kind of the somatic based stuff that we uh, we hold a lot of things in our bodies because we repressed it from a really, really young age, right? When our ability to verbalize things was not the best. So we repress these things, and this is why they kind of stuck in our bodies because we never got a chance to verbalize them, right? Because again, our language capacity wasn't there, and we weren't able to process what was happening for us. So we hold a lot of things in our bodies. So a lot of my work is sort of doing that attachment work, right? It is sort of what you would think as what a traditional, to an extent, psychotherapist is, uh, right? So like I'm psychodynamic oriented, right? So I come from that school of thought that I work dynamically in the room. I look at different dynamics. I'm always looking at different relationships, right? And also these different parts of us, to use that kind of language of part words
Hmm.
that are there to like protect us, to defend us, right? So that's why we get the word like defense mechanism, right? These are things that are there to kind of defend us. These parts of us sometimes we might intellectualize, and they're there for a reason, right? They come from all this like wounded place to like protect this wounded part of us. So we're often kind of processing some of that. I'm very relational when I do therapy. I think it's sort of my part of me that's like naturally there, that I connect to folks really well. So that relationship and healing relationship is something that I'm constantly doing. Yeah. So gaining insight, gaining awareness, processing those wounds, helping folks kind of figure out like why do I behave this way? Why do I have this behavior? Why do I have this random thought that pops up when I'm in
Hmm.
certain scenarios, right? So we would kind of explore some of that work. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would even add, like, I think it's kind of a lost dynamic in our society about not only supporting people in that type of way, but having them really be able to tell the depth of the story, to understand the generations of not only them, but what happened before them, and to be able to make that broader connection that often gets so lost because we're so kind of narrow focused or so individually minded that that connection to generations that came before you and people, right? Like, I think that's such a valuable thing to kind of recreate space for people to be able to, like, tell those stories, make those connections, understand the larger stories that
Yeah.
get replayed again and again within themselves or within their families, that may not fully be kind of connected to that kind of
Yeah. And I
what's
think
happening.
a huge part of it is that I want to be able to give people a voice, right? So a lot of folks who, for whatever reason, were voiceless, right? Were in different power dynamic that they were voiceless. So a lot of my role is like give people voice and and within that, right, that they're able to sort of give be able to gain some like self compassion as they start seeing their younger self and and nurturing their younger self. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. As we get really close to kind of closing, we're gonna talk a little bit about our book. Is that okay, Eric?
Yeah, you got like 5 minutes.
Yeah, and then we'll have an episode, probably a second episode probably soon, and we'll have a person that's
We're
probably
gonna
smarter
try
than
to do
us.
bi-weekly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it may be closer to monthly. So just kind of bear with us in these beginning stages of us finding a rhythm. But
Yeah.
yeah, what do you want to say about the book?
Um, it's it's a book that sort of like integrates me and you together at the like our work together and like our views and everything. So the book goes into sort of like attachment and IFS and all of these theories, especially in the concept of like healing trauma, healing childhood
Yeah,
trauma.
yeah. I was gonna say make sure that we kind of explain that to our listeners. But so we wrote a workbook that
Hmm.
is for adult survivors of childhood trauma. So basically, what this is it's a workbook with specific exercises that are organized in a way to support regulation
Hmm.
and healing, and then later a little bit deeper processing of some things that you may be disconnected from, or you may be noticing
Hmm.
in your adult life that you're not understanding why it keeps happening or why it keeps showing up. And so it was kind of designed ideally to be used in conjunction with a therapist, but also acknowledging that not everybody has the luxury or
Hmm.
space, time, or privilege to be able to go to therapy. And we really want to support that population who may not be able to find the time or resources to get into therapy, and they want to be able to do some processing on their own. So a lot of these exercises, of course, they include so many different types of like therapy and different ways of practicing and connecting to
Hmm.
yourself and understanding yourself, but it's also very kind of resource building. Like in the
Yeah.
beginning half of the book, we really give you a lot of tools on how to support your nervous system, how to regulate yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed, how to notice when you're feeling overwhelmed, how to be able to identify normal and healthy discomfort that comes with starting to work through really difficult things and starting the healing process versus this is a red flag, I need to pause, I need to get help, this is not okay. So we try to create it in this way that you would develop a lot of this kind of insight and understanding towards your
Hmm.
body, towards thoughts and emotions and things that are happening for you, to be able to connect to yourself in this way that supports healing.
Yeah, and these skills, right? They are you can do them at your own pace,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like no, it's not goal oriented, but a lot of it, I think, at the heart of it is for you to start understanding like your body and mind and what's happening, and you're constantly going back to yourself, right? So do these exercises, essentially, you're taking the time to go back to yourself and like understand what's happening, and that process in general of constantly doing these exercises, you're becoming aware of yourself, but also growing in self compassion, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly tending to yourself. And I think that's a huge, I think that's the heart in the heart of the book, right? And we also bring in like psychoeducation and some background to
Mm-hmm.
like trauma and how trauma like works and how it shows up in our body and minds and in the world around us.
Yeah, so we're really excited about it. We're going to continue to kind of talk about it in spurts in the next coming episodes as we will be anticipating the release date. We're also going to try to facilitate some different types of perhaps maybe virtual events or in person events if you're in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we want to be kind of holding spaces for
Hmm.
people to know about the book, to ask questions about the book. So if there are any questions or things that are popping up for you, even just hearing this episode today, we invite you and we'll put information and stuff in the notes section. But feel free to send us an email at info@sunsettraumatherapy.com, and we'd love to hear from you.
House of Therapy podcast.
All right. Thanks
Thank you.
everyone for
Bye.
listening. Bye.